All right, guys, what a game between the Rockets and the Jazz. This is the Hoops Nerd postgame show. I'm Hanson James, and I'm really, really happy. I mean, you all know that I'm a Jazz fan. I love to cover the NBA, and I love to cover everyone as fairly as I can. So we're going to talk about the Rockets and the Jazz. You'll notice I'm a little happier tonight than the last three games, especially game 3, where it was just like my heart was broken. Tonight, the Jazz actually showed up, and it was, for Jazz fans, it was a beautiful thing to see. There were some things for Houston fans to take from the game, but in a lot of ways, they might just be okay. But as for the Rockets, it's like a night and day difference from the shooting from Harden from game 3 to game 4. Game 4, he shot 50% from 3, but he was 8 for 19 from the field. And I think, and I mentioned this in the game 3 post game, that loss really hurt the Jazz, and it's the reason that Houston they'll probably win this series, but that's why that game 3 loss for Utah was so frustrating, because it looked like Gobert has finally kind of figured out the timing of that Harden drive to the hoop. And so, it's just so painful if you're a Jazz fan, because if they just could have stolen game 3, when Harden had that bad shooting night, and then you have a night like this, it's an even series. Now it's 3-1, and it's, just I think it's like literally true. No team in history has ever come back from a 3-0 deficit. That's why that loss was the series in a lot of ways. So, frustrating night for the Jazz. And I think part of the reason, two things, there's always two sides to a story, and there's always two reasons that a thing happens. One, Gobert had a dominant first quarter. It was absolutely dominant, and it was the reason the Jazz won the game in a lot of ways, because it gave them that lead for when Houston came roaring back offensively. Part of that was because Gobert really is the defensive player of the year, and I hope people are watching, because this is things he's been doing all season. And the thing that's interesting for Utah is Gobert gets better as the series goes. He figures things out. His timing gets better. This happened last year in the Thunder series. Like Steven Adams, the first couple games really manhandled Rudy. Rudy figured it out, and they won that series. Oh, that game 3 loss looks so bad for Utah, because it would be even and you would have no idea. And so that's part of it, is Gobert is that good. But also part of it, as I think Houston came into this game kind of thinking the Jazz were going to roll over. It's hard for a team like Utah to say, do I want to really win this game and go back to Houston and lose and then come back and just prolong my vacation to the Bahamas? I think Houston honestly felt that. And I think the broadcast talked about that D'Antoni was angry at his team for coming in with kind of this, lackadaisical, we're just going to win this game. So thing for Houston is they had a big time night Eric Gordon was just lights out from 3. At the end of the game, he was not, but there was one point he was like 5 for 6 from 3, and it looks like he may have missed like his last 4 threes to end the game. The role players for Houston played well. Harden had a nice night from 3, but overall, it's funny that like you think that Harden has an off night because he was 8 for 19 from the field, still scores 30 points. Ho-hum for James Harden, 30 points. It's crazy. Chris Paul was part of the reason the Jazz did really well, because they've guarded Chris Paul well this series. I know the Rockets have been dominating Utah, but the last 2 games at least, Utah has really kind of guarded Chris Paul well. Tonight, 23 points, 2 for 8 from 3. He hasn't been able to do that little curl around shot that just annihilated Utah last season. So that's a promising sign for Utah. Here's what the Rockets have to do if you don't want a crazy story to happen. They have to beat Utah in Game 5. They have to beat Utah in Game 5. Because what happens if Utah comes in and steals a win in Game 5, and then you go back to Utah with that crowd and that intensity? You give Utah life. Houston, you have to beat Utah in Game 5 and close this series out. Because if you don't, that's when things start get a little crazy. So that Houston needs to come into Game 5, play their game. They know who they are, and they need to beat Utah. Now, there's a few signs. I don't predict a Jazz win, but there are a few signs from this game that are pretty exciting. One, Donovan Mitchell at the end of the game was dominant. He got stronger as it went. The scary thing for Houston a little bit is Capella looked tired. And that comes from 48 minutes of Rudy Gobert and Derrick Favors. Capella, they ask a lot out of Capella. Capella works. and they have him switching out on the perimeter, and he's guarding guards, and he's moving back and forth. It's got to be tiring to be doing that on the perimeter, and then inside you have Derrick Favors, just who is an absolute monster and bully, just dominating you and boxing you out and fighting you and elbowing you and shouldering you and getting those rebounds over and over and over and over. That's got to be tiring. And tonight it looked like he was tired. The blocks he was doing on Mitchell in games 1 through 3 and at the first quarter of this game, they weren't there because he was tired at the end of the game. You just hope if you're Houston that Capella's not wearing down. That's why they got to win game 5. You don't win game 5, things start to get a little interesting. Anyways, for Utah, obviously Donovan Mitchell was the story. Rudy Gobert was dominant in the first quarter. And then shout out to Quinn Snyder, who put Favors back in the fourth, who then also just carried him up to the end. Derrick Favors has been... This is what Derrick Favors does. He's just a dominant force inside. He helps you win games. He's just dominant. He's fantastic and always going to be a plus player. When he's at that athleticism, he grabs the ball, he catches it, he finishes, he rebounds, he grabs offensive boards, defensive boards. He had a great night defensively. Fantastic from Favors. And then also the player that's really showing up, Royce O'Neal. Royce O'Neal is like blossoming before Utah's eyes. Like, he hit some threes tonight that he wasn't hitting before. He was 1 for 5 last game. Tonight he hit them and then just had some really nice drives to the rim. Nice to see Royce O'Neal figuring it out. Rubio had some great moments and he had some woof moments. Like Rubio is basically like those jelly beans from Harry Potter where sometimes you eat it and it's really good and sometimes you eat it and it's like, oh, really not good. So you hope that Rubio can have a good game. When he's playing well, the Jazz are obviously better. When he's not, it's rough, you know? So it's nice to see Royce O'Neal giving the Jazz another option. What happened to Joe Ingles? Joe Ingles tonight, 3 points. 3 points. Where is Joe Ingles? Joe Ingles, where are you? Come back. Here's a scary thought for Houston. What if Joe Ingles shows up in game 5 and has one of those big Joe Ingles games? I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I will talk to you after game 5, guys. Like and subscribe this video. I will talk to you later.